It was a big story, right? Just a lot of chaos.
The John Benet Ramsey murder.
How much of a difference would it have made if police acted on his phone calls?
Big difference.
A new witness speaks.
He took off the mask.
The circumstances were very similar. I believe that creature came into our home when we were gone. They had...
How confident are you that you will get a conviction in the case of Maddie McCann?
The investigation is still going on.
As some of you know, I've traveled to Boulder, Colorado and Praia da Luz, Portugal. I've written multiple books on both cases. Arguably, the Ramsey case is America's most famous case, bar none. It's certainly America's most famous unsolved case. In the same way, probably no one in Britain today hasn't heard of Madeleine McCann. In what ways are both of these cases similar? Well, in more ways than you can imagine.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. In this analysis, we're going to look at 25 similarities as well as 7 crucial differences between the Ramsey case and the McCann case. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed, please do. If you find this analysis worthwhile, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. Number 1, John Benet and Madeleine were quote-unquote very tired. In both cases, the parents claimed their daughters, who both had documented sleeping difficulties, miraculously slept soundly on the night that they disappeared from their beds. They were both sound asleep, apparently long before their siblings or anyone else. Although this is the common narrative in both cases, in my opinion, I doubt whether John Benet or Madeleine were ever put to bed on the night of their respective incidents. I also think the fact that this happened at night is interesting. Many also believe that something happened to Madeleine while her parents were eating dinner, but I believe something happened a lot earlier in the evening. By the same token, it's suggested, including on her tombstone, that John Benet died much earlier than I think she really did die. Her tombstone shows that she died on December 25th, but I believe she died much later in the evening, sometime after midnight, early on the morning of December 26th. Again, the fact that this happened at night is significant. Number 2, gross contamination of crime scene by friends. There's a strange hypocrisy in both cases. The cops are blamed for botching the case, but the crime scene couldn't have been more contaminated if anyone did so deliberately. Both the Ramseys and the McCanns invited a large group of friends into the crime scene, essentially creating a stampede of strangers through the crime scene. Number 3, broken window, but in reality, no signs of forced entry. In both cases, a big fuss has been made about a window as a point of ingress and egress. Why would you break in through a window but not leave through a nearby unlocked door? In both cases, the entry point made no sense, although there was no sign that a stranger had broken and entered. While in the Ramsey case, John said he broke the window, so the intruder didn't even do that. Number 4, a revolving door of suspects. In a proper, authentic investigation, you would expect a narrowing down of suspects. Think about it as a funnel. Starts off broad and it just narrows down. While in the Ramsey and McCann cases, there is an ever-widening circle of potential suspects, some of whom are recycled, and some become catchy every few years after amnesia and ignorance set in once more. Right now, the paedophile of the moment in the Ramsey case is Gary Oliva, although John Mark Carr seems to be making a comeback. And that's despite both of them being excluded because of their DNA. While in the McCann case, Christian Bruckner is the so-called prime suspect at the moment, despite literally no evidence connecting him to the case. In both cases, both suspects apparently confessed to the crimes, and this was taken as absolute evidence of guilt, even though they strenuously denied their involvement in subsequent interviews. Number 5, phone records and bank statements. There seems to be something of a black hole when it comes to something as obvious as phone and bank records in both cases. Have a look at this excerpt from Steve Thomas's John Bonet Inside the Ramsey Murder Investigation. We were allowed to obtain the Ramsey's cellular and home telephone records between December 1st and the 27th, 1996, but we had to wait almost a year to see them, which had given the Ramsey lawyers months to work through the limited documents. The woefully incomplete permission slip did not give up Ramsey's company phones, calls made with a telephone card, or records about calls before or after December. We found nothing worthwhile, just another exhausting trip to nowhere. Then a little further along in Steve Thomas's narrative, this bombshell. December, however, the only period we were allowed to see was empty. No calls at all. I asked if someone could have removed billing records from the computer. No way, the AirTouch source told me. There is a similar black hole of phone calls in the McCann case as well. Number 6, disagreement over cooperation. Both the Ramseys and the McCanns were accused of not cooperating, and then they strenuously denied that they didn't cooperate. They were adamant that they cooperated with the police, and the detectives investigating them were adamant that they weren't. We know for a fact that the McCanns refused to participate in a reenactment at the police's behest, or, well, let's just say they never ultimately did participate, yet they participated in a reenactment involving media that were friendly to their cause. The Ramseys left Boulder entirely and only sat down for their first interview after laying down a number of conditions. Meanwhile, the McCanns were asked to respect judicial secrecy laws in Portugal, which required them to not discuss details during an ongoing investigation. Despite this, they actively engaged with the media through PR people, blogs, interviews, and press releases. There were a number of anniversary events taking place to celebrate or memorialize the anniversaries of Madeleine being missing for 50 days, 100 days, 200 days, and so on. Balloons released all over the world. In the Ramsey case, there was also a war of leaks, an attempt to influence public opinion and thus exert pressure on the other side. But when it came to leaks from the police side, well, then there was trouble. Number 7, lead detective becomes disgraced detective. In the narrative surrounding both cases, the police detective leading the investigation suddenly becomes the bad guy, and the parents the victims. Both detectives were sued by both sets of parents, and yet both detectives' books are still out there. Interestingly, when Detective Amaral's case ultimately triumphed at the European Court of Human Rights, the British media had absolutely nothing to say about it. Number 8, allegations of neglect. Both cases involve allegations of neglect involving little girls. In the Ramsey case, these allegations seem to center around bedwetting, although there are other issues as well. In Madeleine's case, it was this idea of not getting a babysitter and leaving the children for hours at a time at night. Number 9, sleeping arrangements. It's not completely clear in which room either of the children slept or habitually slept. There are indications in both cases that both John Bonet and Madeleine, and possibly another sibling as well, had difficulty sleeping over the last few nights leading up to the incident. Number 10, holiday. Both cases occurred during a holiday break. Number 11, parties and revelry. Both the Ramseys and the McCanns were celebrating. There seemed to be an increased level of parties and revelry taking place in the days leading up to the respective incidents. Number 12, church. The church plays a massive role in the fabric of both cases. The Ramseys even had a pastor present during the kidnapping phase. There were also these strange moments where the McCanns and the Ramseys seemed to sort of pray in front of everyone, sort of asking God to intervene. It was a kind of a drama that made an impression on certain people. The McCanns even went so far as meeting the Pope. Number 13, PR. It's hard to think of any case that tops the public relations blitz we saw in both these cases. And arguably, that blitz shows no signs of subsiding, even now, decades later. Incidentally, in both cases, Netflix have told stories sympathetic to the parents. And by the way, both those stories are actually the same. It's the pedophile abductor that really committed this crime. Number 14, fund. The Ramseys and the McCanns used PR to drum up support, which led to a huge amount of donations, which was in turn used to support a fund. These funds, as far as I know, paid for legal battles and additional PR. The Ramseys and the McCanns also quickly set up websites, which they used to share information with the public. Number 15, reward. Both the Ramseys and the McCanns offered rewards. The Ramsey reward was less than the ransom note requested in the note. The reward in the McCann case reached several £1,000,000. Had Madeleine been snatched for money, it doesn't really make sense why a down-on-his-luck petty criminal wouldn't claim the reward. In both cases, the rewards offered have never been claimed. Number 16, wrote a book. Both the Ramseys and the McCanns wrote books. In both cases, a paedophile abductor is imputed as the guilty culprit. Could it be this one? Maybe it's that one. There's some evidence to implicate that one. Could it be this one, that one, or the next one? Also, at the same time, a perfect fairy tale picture is presented of the final moments of their respective daughters' lives, sleeping safely and peacefully in their beds. Number 17, favorite toy animal. This might surprise a couple of you. Madeleine had Cuddle Cat. Did you know John Bonet's favorite toy was also a stuffed animal and also a cat? John Bonet's favorite toy, which he called Kitty, was actually buried with her. Number 18, prior injuries. Madeleine bruised her ankle as she boarded the flight to Portugal. Her mother actually wrote about this in her book, Madeleine. John Bonet had sustained several injuries to her face and to her finger in the weeks and months leading up to the incident. Number 19, blood traces. Very small traces of blood appear to be found in both cases. The tiny amounts could indicate a crime scene that was altered or cleaned up. You could even take it a little bit further and say DNA evidence was found, but it was so microscopic that it was ultimately and arguably inconclusive. Number 20, sexual narrative / pedophile narrative. A sexual narrative is implicit in the apologia of both cases. 21, respected by community. The parents of both victims were regarded as wealthy and respectable by the public. 22, political interference. Enough said, or perhaps not enough has been said about this particular aspect. 23, unsolved. Okay, well, I guess that is self-explanatory. 24, lawsuits. The Ramseys and the McCanns are certainly impressive for the number and scale of the lawsuits they pursued, especially against the media. 25. Detective publishes a book showing another side to the story. Both Steve Thomas and Detective Amaral presented very compelling, though in my view, ultimately flawed theories for what they thought happened. Both narratives clearly show, while there were cogent possibilities surrounding the parents, the police did follow dozens, if not hundreds of leads initially, none of which led anywhere. And that brings us to differences. Number 1, John Bonet was found in the home. Madeleine wasn't. Number 2, bogus ransom note in the Ramsey case, bogus Tannerman in the McCann case. In the Ramsey case, the ransom note indicated that John Bonet was safe and unharmed, that she was in some other location, and that someone would call at a specific time to collect the ransom, none of which happened. And so it did seem as though the ransom note was bogus. In terms of the McCann case, Jane Tanner, who was part of a group of the McCann's friends who came to be known as the Tupper Seven, claimed that she'd seen a man walking with a child. After 5 years, this sighting turned out to be a dead end. Number 3, the McCanns were made arguidos, which is a formal suspect. The McCanns were never on trial, except when their cases were examined in terms of slander allegations. Meanwhile, there's this appearance that the Ramseys were not made formal suspects, except that a grand jury voted to indict both parents, except the district attorney overruled this, and this information was withheld from the public for something like 13 years. Number 4, dogs. Dogs made a breakthrough in one case and were entirely absent in the other. It is interesting, though, that the Ramseys' neighbors had custody over John Bonet's dog. Why? Was it a matter of inconvenience, or was it the dog being neglected or mistreated at the Ramsey home? This isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. John Bonet's first dog became ill and was simply exchanged for another dog. Number 5, The Ramseys were polygraphed. The McCanns, as far as I know, were not. Number 6. There is a sexual narrative in one case that I believe is legitimate, if often overstated. The sexual narrative in the other case is, I believe, silly and misguided, and very clearly overstated. Number 7. Chemical analysis for sedatives was done on hair samples in the McCann case, although this only took place several months after the incident. In the Ramsey case, extensive handwriting samples were taken over a period of several months. The results of tests in both cases were either inconclusive or negative. In the Ramsey case, it emerged only much later that Patsy Ramsey was ambidextrous, meaning she could write with both hands. Thus it was, I think, from the 4th sample, written using her left hand, that appeared to show some similarities for the first time to the note. Okay, I'm not going to take it further than that. If you can think of any additional similarities that I haven't mentioned, please let me know in the comments. Same thing with differences. For those following the Ramsey case, I will be dealing with John Andrew in the next episode, so look out for that. Thank you for listening this far. Take care, and I'll see you guys next time.